relationship. I never imagined my own son would drain my retirement savings while I recovered from surgery, but the revenge I served was colder than anything I could have planned. I'm grateful you're here with me today. Stay until the end to hear how this all unfolded. And please comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. At 73 years old, I thought I understood betrayal in all its forms. I'd survived a loveless marriage to a man who valued his whiskey more than his family. I'd buried my husband Gerald after 42 years of what others called marriage, but what I knew was survival. I'd clawed my way through widowhood, learned to balance checkbooks he'd never let me touch, and rebuilt a life I could finally call my own. My small apartment in Maplewood wasn't fancy, but it was mine. My routines were simple but fulfilling. My savings account was modest but secure. Or so I thought. The phone call that shattered my carefully constructed peace came on a Tuesday morning in late March. I remember the exact date because it was the day I'd planned to plant tomatoes in the community garden plot I'd finally secured after 2 years on the waiting list. Spring had arrived early in Riverside County that year, and I'd been looking forward to getting my hands in the soil, to nurturing something that would actually grow and thrive under my care. Instead, I was about to discover that while I'd been recovering from hip replacement surgery 4 months earlier, someone had been systematically destroying everything I'd worked so hard to build. Mrs. Castellano? The voice on the other end was female, professional, with an edge of concern that immediately put me on alert. This is Rebecca Martinez from Premier Savings Bank's Fraud Prevention Department. Do you have a few minutes to speak with me about your accounts? My hands, weathered from years of working as a nurse before retirement, trembled slightly as I set down my coffee mug. The morning sun was streaming through my kitchen window, illuminating dust motes in the air. Everything looked normal, peaceful, safe. But something in Rebecca's tone made my stomach clench with a primal fear I couldn't quite name. Fraud prevention? I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. Is there a problem with my account? Mrs. Castellano, I'm calling because our automated monitoring system has flagged unusual activity across multiple accounts linked to your Social Security number. We've detected what appears to be systematic charges across 12 different credit cards and lines of credit, all bearing your name as either the primary account holder or co-signer. 12 credit cards? That couldn't be right. I had exactly 2 credit cards, both with modest limits that I used sparingly and paid off in full each month. One was for groceries and gas, the other I kept for emergencies. Both were tucked safely in my wallet at that very moment. There must be some mistake, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even as my heart began to race. I don't only have 2 credit cards, and I monitor them very carefully. I certainly haven't opened any new accounts. I understand this is concerning, Mrs. Castellano. That's precisely why I'm calling. The pattern we're seeing is consistent with identity theft or unauthorized use by someone with access to your personal information. The charges we've flagged total approximately $87,342 over the past 4 months. The number hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped, my hand flying to my chest as if I could somehow slow my suddenly pounding heart through sheer force of will. $87,000? That was more than I'd saved in 2 years of living frugally. That was nearly everything I had left from Gerald's life insurance and the sale of our old house. That's impossible, I whispered. I haven't spent anywhere near that amount. I barely spend $300 a month beyond my basic bills. I believe you, Mrs. Castellano, which is why we need to address this immediately. Can you come into our Riverside branch today? I know this is short notice, but given the amounts involved and the ongoing nature of the charges, time is critical. The sooner we can document this and begin the dispute process, the better chance we have of recovering these funds and preventing additional fraud. My mind was reeling, trying to process what she was telling me. Someone had stolen my identity? But who? I was careful with my personal information. I shredded documents. I didn't respond to suspicious emails. I'd even taken that senior safety seminar at the library about protecting yourself from scams. Yes, I heard myself say, though my voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. Yes, I can come in today. What time? Can you be here in an hour? I've already pulled all the relevant statements and documentation. We'll need to go through everything line by line. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long moment staring at nothing. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Chen from 3B walking her little terrier, the same route she took every morning at 9:30. Everything looked so normal. How could everything look so normal when my world had just tilted on its axis? I forced myself to move, to get dressed, to gather my wallet and keys, and as I drove the 15 minutes to the bank, my mind kept circling back to one impossible question. Who? Who had access to my personal information? Who could have opened credit cards in my name? Who would do this to me? The answer started to crystallize as I sat across from Rebecca Martinez in a small conference room at Premier Savings Bank. Rebecca was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately appreciated. She'd laid out a shocking array of documents across the conference table, each one representing another violation of my trust, another theft of my security. "Let's start with your existing accounts," Rebecca said gently, sliding a folder toward me. "These are the 2 credit cards you mentioned, the ones you actively use and monitor. As you can see, the activity here is consistent with what you described. Regular monthly charges, always paid in full, nothing unusual." I nodded, feeling slightly relieved that at least those accounts were as I'd expected. "Now," Rebecca continued, her expression growing more serious, "these are the other 10 credit cards that have been opened over the past 8 months, all using your social security number, date of birth, and other personal information. Most have limits between $5,000 and $15,000, taking advantage of your excellent credit score." She spread out the statements, and I felt bile rise in my throat as I scanned the charges. Nordstrom, Neiman Marcus, Tiffany & Co., luxury hotels, high-end restaurants, a BMW dealership, an interior design firm, a bridal boutique. "Mrs. Castellano," Rebecca said carefully, watching my face, "I need to ask you a difficult question. Is there anyone in your life who would have had access to your personal documents? Someone you trusted with your information, perhaps to help manage your affairs?" The question landed like a stone in my chest, because suddenly, horrifyingly, I knew. My son. Marcus. Rebecca's expression remained neutral, but I saw understanding flicker in her eyes. She'd probably seen this before, I realized. Family members stealing from elderly parents. It was probably more common than anyone wanted to admit. "Tell me about the circumstances," Rebecca said gently. So I did. I told her about my hip replacement surgery 4 months ago, how Marcus had insisted on helping me during my recovery, how he'd moved into my apartment for 3 weeks, helping me with daily tasks, managing my bills, picking up my medications, how grateful I'd been for his help, how relieved I'd felt knowing my capable, successful son was there to take care of everything while I focused on physical therapy and healing. How stupid I'd been. He would have had complete access to all my documents during that time. My social security card, my birth certificate, my bank statements, everything. I trusted him completely. He's my son. Why would I suspect anything? "This isn't your fault," Rebecca said firmly. "You need to understand that. You were recovering from major surgery. You had every reason to trust your son. The blame here lies entirely with the person who violated that trust." But it felt like my fault. It felt like I should have known, should have seen something, should have protected myself better. Wasn't that what everyone always said? You should have been more careful.
You should have known better. I need to show you something, Rebecca said, pulling up something on her laptop. I had our IT team pull up the applications for these credit cards. Look at the signatures. She turned the screen toward me, and I stared at my own signature, or rather, a nearly perfect forgery of it. Marcus had always been good at mimicry, even as a child. He could copy his father's signature to get out of gym class, could forge my handwriting well enough to write his own permission slips. I thought it was clever, then, a harmless skill that got him out of minor childhood troubles. I'd never imagined he'd use that skill to rob me blind. The applications were all submitted online, but they required document uploads, copies of your driver's license, proof of address, social security card. Someone had access to all of those documents and used them to open these accounts. When did this start? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca checked her notes. The first application was filed 7 months ago, in August. The account was approved within 48 hours. After that, there was a pattern. 1 or 2 new accounts per month, each time with higher credit limits as your credit utilization increased, but payments were being made regularly enough to avoid default. 7 months ago. That was a full month before my surgery, which meant this wasn't opportunistic. This wasn't Marcus taking advantage of a situation. This was planned, calculated, premeditated. I need to see all the charges, I said, straightening in my chair. Every single one. What followed was 3 of the most painful hours of my life. Rebecca and I went through each statement, line by line, charge by charge. With each transaction, I felt another piece of the sun I thought I knew crumble away, revealing a stranger underneath. August. Charges at high-end furniture stores. $4,200 at a place called Lux Home Interiors, $2,800 at Restoration Hardware, $1,600 at West Elm. September. A charge for $8,500 in a luxury hotel in Napa Valley. Multiple charges at expensive restaurants, Michelin-starred places I'd only read about in magazines. October. This was the month of my surgery. While I was in the hospital, in pain, dependent on him for everything, Marcus had charged $6,700 at Nordstrom, $3,400 at a men's clothing boutique, and $5,200 for something listed as consulting fees at a business I'd never heard of. November. More restaurant charges, another hotel stay, this time in San Francisco. $12,000 for a down payment at a luxury car dealership. December. The charges escalated. $42,000 at Cartier. When I saw that number, I had to ask Rebecca to repeat it, certain I'd misread it. $42,000, she confirmed quietly, at Cartier on December 18th. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened Instagram. I rarely use social media, but I'd created an account a year ago because Marcus said it was a good way to stay connected with family. I'd spent more time looking at cat videos than anything else, but I'd occasionally checked Marcus's profile to see what he was up to. His account was set to private, but I was one of his followers. I scrolled back through his posts until I found what I was looking for. December 18th. A photo of Marcus on one knee in front of a woman I'd only met twice, Chelsea Whitmore. She was beautiful in that polished, high-maintenance way some women achieve with enough money and effort. Her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate, her clothes expensive and trendy. In the photo, she was holding up her left hand, showing off a massive diamond ring that caught the light like a small sun. The caption read, "She said yes, spending forever with this amazing woman, #engaged, #future Mrs. Whitmore, #he proposed, #Cartier ring." I turned the phone toward Rebecca, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold it steady. "That ring?" I said, my voice cracking. "That ring was purchased with my credit card. My son proposed to his girlfriend with a $42,000 ring that he bought by stealing from his mother." Her face tightened with anger, the first time I'd seen her professional composure slip. "Mrs. Castellano? I'm so sorry. I've been doing this job for 12 years, and I still can't understand how people can do this to their own family members.
But the revelations weren't over. As we continued through the statements, a picture emerged of systematic, calculated theft designed to fund a lifestyle that Marcus clearly couldn't afford on his own. I'd believed my son was a successful real estate developer. That's what he'd always told me. He'd talk about his projects, his clients, the deals he was closing. When I'd seen him driving luxury cars and wearing expensive clothes, I'd assumed it was because his business was thriving. Now I understood the truth. My son was living a lie, and he was financing that lie by destroying his mother's financial security. "Here's what I don't understand," I said, staring at a particularly large charge. "How did he make the payments without me noticing? These cards would have required minimum payments each month. Wouldn't that have shown up somewhere?" Rebecca nodded grimly. "He was making minimum payments from what appears to be a personal account. Just enough to keep the cards active and prevent them from going into default, which would have triggered alerts. It's a common pattern in this type of fraud. Make small enough payments to fly under the radar while continuing to accumulate debt on the back end." "But the interest," I said, doing quick mental math. "With balances this high, the interest alone must be thousands of dollars per month." "Approximately $4,200 in interest charges across all accounts last month alone," Rebecca confirmed, "which means the actual amount owed is growing rapidly, even with minimum payments being made." I felt sick. Not only had Marcus stolen from me, he'd done it in a way that would maximize the long-term damage, saddling me with debt that would balloon with compound interest if I couldn't get it resolved quickly. "What happens now?" I asked. "What are my options?" Rebecca's expression was sympathetic but serious. "You have several paths forward, Mrs. Castellano, and I want to be honest with you about what each one entails. First, you can file a police report for identity theft and fraud. Given the amounts involved and the systematic nature of the theft, this would be classified as felony fraud and potentially elder financial abuse, which carries enhanced penalties in this state." Elder abuse. The term made me flinch. I didn't think of myself as elderly, despite my 73 years. I still volunteered at the community center twice a week. I took water aerobics classes. I read voraciously and kept up with current events. But legally, I supposed I was elderly, and my son had taken advantage of that status to rob me. "If you file a police report," Rebecca continued, "the banks would typically work with you to reverse the charges and repair your credit. However, it means your son would face criminal charges. Depending on the prosecutor and the evidence, he could be looking at significant prison time." Prison? My son in prison? The thought made my chest ache, even knowing what he'd done. Could I really do that? Could I really be responsible for sending my own child to jail? "The second option," Rebecca said, "is to work directly with him to repay the debt. You would need to close all the compromised accounts immediately and set up a repayment plan. However, I need to be clear about the risks of this approach. Without the threat of legal consequences, many perpetrators simply don't follow through on repayment. You could end up still owing the money with no recourse." "And the third option?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "You could do nothing, accept the debt as your own, and work to pay it off over time. But Mrs. Castellano, I strongly advise against this. You're on a fixed income. This amount of debt would likely mean bankrupting yourself to pay for your son's crimes. You'd lose your financial security for your remaining years, and he would face no consequences for what he's done." The stark reality of my choices settled over me like a heavy blanket. Report my son to the police and potentially send him to prison, try to work it out privately with no guarantee he'd actually repay anything, or sacrifice my own financial future to protect him from the consequences of his actions. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Can I have some time?" "Of course. But Mrs. Castellano, there is one thing we need to do immediately, regardless of which path you choose. We need to close these compromised accounts and remove your son's authorized access to any of your financial accounts.
The longer we wait, the more charges could accumulate. She was right, of course. Even if I didn't know what else to do, I couldn't let the theft continue. Yes, I said firmly. Let's close everything. Remove his access from all my accounts. I want him locked out immediately. Rebecca nodded and began pulling up accounts on her computer. I'll start the process right now. This should be completed within 48 hours. In the meantime, I'm going to set up fraud alerts on your credit reports with all 3 bureaus. That will prevent anyone, including your son, from opening new accounts in your name. As Rebecca typed, I sat there feeling numb, overwhelmed by the scope of what I'd learned. $87,000, 12 credit cards, 7 months of systematic theft, and underneath it all, a betrayal that cut deeper than any financial loss. My son had looked me in the eye while I recovered from surgery, had smiled and helped me to the bathroom, had brought me meals and driven me to physical therapy appointments, all while secretly robbing me blind. Every kindness had been a lie. Every expression of concern had been manipulation. He had been playing a role, the devoted son, while behind the scenes he was destroying my financial future to fund his fraudulent lifestyle. Mrs. Castellano, Rebecca said gently, interrupting my spiraling thoughts, I know this is overwhelming. I want you to take my card and please call me if you have any questions or if you need help navigating any of this. I've also written down the contact information for a lawyer who specializes in elder financial abuse cases. Even if you decide not to press criminal charges, you may need legal representation to deal with the creditors and protect your assets. I took the card and the paper with the lawyer's information, tucking both into my purse with hands that still trembled. Thank you, Rebecca, for everything. For catching this, for treating me with respect, for not making me feel stupid for trusting my own son. You're not stupid, she said firmly. You're a victim of a calculated fraud perpetrated by someone you had every reason to trust. Please don't let anyone, including yourself, suggest otherwise. I left the bank in a daze, squinting against the bright afternoon sunlight. Somehow hours had passed while I'd been in that conference room, learning the extent of my son's betrayal. The world had continued spinning, people going about their normal days, while mine had been irrevocably altered. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a long time, unable to drive, unable to think clearly about what to do next. My phone buzzed in my purse, and I pulled it out to see a text message from Marcus.
Hey, Mom. Hope you're having a good day. Chelsea and I are thinking of stopping by this weekend. Want to take you out for lunch. Our treat. Emoji. The casual tone of it, the cheerful emoji, the complete lack of awareness or guilt. It ignited something in me that I'd been keeping carefully contained for the past 3 hours. Rage. Pure, white-hot rage that burned away the shock and confusion and left only crystalline clarity. He was going to take me to lunch with money he'd stolen from me? He was going to sit across a table and smile and make small talk, all well knowing exactly what he'd done, and presumably believing I was too stupid or too trusting to ever find out? I made a decision in that moment. Sitting in that parking lot with the spring sun warming my face through the windshield. I wasn't going to protect him. I wasn't going to quietly absorb this loss to spare him consequences. I wasn't going to play the role of the naive, elderly victim who could be manipulated and discarded. Marcus had gambled that my love for him would outweigh my sense of justice, that I would choose protecting my son over protecting myself. He'd gambled wrong. I drove home and immediately called the lawyer Rebecca had recommended, a woman named Patricia Brennan, who specialized in elder financial abuse cases. Her secretary managed to squeeze me in for a consultation the following morning. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a bottle of wine Gerald had bought for some occasion that never materialized, poured myself a generous glass, and sat down at my computer to do research. I needed to understand exactly what Marcus had done, what laws he'd broken, what consequences he'd face. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I could decide how to respond.
What I learned over the next several hours, aided by search engines and legal websites and forum posts from other victims of similar crimes, was both enlightening and enraging. Elder financial abuse was far more common than I'd realized. It was estimated that elderly people lost billions of dollars each year to financial exploitation, often by family members. The perpetrators typically followed similar patterns: gaining the victim's trust, obtaining access to financial information and accounts, then systematically draining assets while the victim remained unaware. The psychological impact on victims was severe. Many elderly people chose not to report family member theft because they felt ashamed, didn't want to cause trouble, or couldn't bear the thought of their child or grandchild going to jail. That shame and reluctance to prosecute meant most perpetrators faced no real consequences, free to continue their theft until the victim had nothing left. I also learned that in cases where victims did report the crime, the legal outcomes varied widely. Some perpetrators faced serious jail time. Others received probation or community service. Much depended on the specific circumstances, the amount stolen, whether violence or threats were involved, and frankly, whether the prosecutor's office had the resources to pursue what were often seen as complicated family matters. But regardless of the criminal outcome, civil litigation was always an option. I could sue Marcus for restitution, placing liens on any property or assets he had, garnishing wages if necessary. It would be messy and painful, but it would at least give me a chance to recover what he had stolen. By the time I finished my research and my second glass of wine, it was nearly midnight. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but also strangely clear-headed. I knew what I had to do. Before I confronted Marcus, before I made any legal decisions, I needed to understand the full extent of what he'd done. I needed more evidence, more documentation, more proof of his fraudulent lifestyle. I needed to follow the money. Over the next 2 days, I became a detective, piecing together the puzzle of my son's deception. I went through Chelsea's public social media accounts with a fine-toothed comb, screenshotting posts and cross-referencing them with the charges on my credit card statements. The correlation was damning. Every luxury vacation, every expensive dinner, every designer purchase she'd posted about matched up perfectly with fraudulent charges on my accounts. She'd even tagged the restaurants and hotels, making my job almost too easy. On December 18th, when Marcus had charged $42,000 at Cartier, Chelsea had posted photos of her engagement, gushing about the surprise proposal at Les Jardins, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Another $800 dinner charge on my card. In January, they'd apparently taken a spa weekend at an exclusive resort in Ojai. The charges showed up on my statement: $4,200 for the resort, $800 at the spa, $600 at the resort restaurant. In February, they apparently took a trip to Las Vegas. Chelsea's Instagram documented their stay at the Bellagio, dinner at a celebrity chef's restaurant, shows, clubs, everything. My credit card statements showed it all, nearly $7,000 for a weekend of excess that I had unknowingly funded. But the most damning evidence came from something I found buried deep in Chelsea's Instagram stories, those temporary posts that disappeared after 24 hours, but that she'd saved to a highlights reel labeled wedding planning. In one story from late February, she'd posted a screenshot of a wedding planning checklist with the caption, "Thank God Marcus's business is doing so well. This Tuscany wedding is going to cost a fortune, but he keeps telling me not to worry about the budget. Hashtag best fiancé ever. Hashtag destination wedding." A Tuscany wedding. They were planning a destination wedding in Italy, and somehow I knew exactly how they intended to pay for it. How many more credit cards was Marcus planning to open in my name? How much more was he planning to steal before someone finally stopped him?
I took screenshots of everything, creating a digital folder that grew larger by the hour. I documented not just the charges, but the lies, the manufactured success, the fraudulent lifestyle that Marcus had built on the foundation of my destroyed credit and drained savings. By Friday afternoon, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier that would make any prosecutor's job easy. Bank statements, credit card bills, social media posts, timelines showing the correlation between charges and Chelsea's posts. Everything needed to prove systematic, calculated fraud. But I still hadn't decided what to do with all this evidence. Part of me wanted to march straight to the police station and file charges immediately. Let Marcus face the full consequences of what he'd done. Another part of me, the part that still remembered holding him as a baby, that had sat through countless school plays and baseball games, that had believed in him even when he struggled, that part hesitated. Saturday arrived, the day Marcus had suggested they take me to lunch. I'd responded to his text with a counteroffer. Why don't you both come to my place for dinner instead? 6 p.m.? I'll make pot roast, Marcus's favorite. His response had been immediate and enthusiastic. Sounds perfect, Mom. Can't wait. Chelsea is excited to spend more time with you. The lie of it, the casual cruelty, it strengthened my resolve. I spent Saturday afternoon preparing pot roast, the recipe I'd perfected over 40 years of making it for family dinners. I'd made it for Marcus's birthdays, for holidays, for Sunday dinners when he'd come home from college. It was comfort food, family food, the kind of meal that spoke of home and love and security. It seemed fitting, somehow, that I would serve it one last time before I destroyed whatever was left of our relationship. I set the table with my good dishes, the ones I'd inherited from my mother, and placed the folder of evidence on the side table in the living room, ready for when the time came. At 6:15, 15 minutes late, as usual, Marcus and Chelsea arrived. My son looked prosperous in what I now recognized as designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that had probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year, all purchased with my money, of course. Chelsea wore a dress that looked fresh from a boutique window and heels that were completely impractical for a casual dinner at her future mother-in-law's modest apartment. Her engagement ring caught the light as she walked, that $42,000 symbol of my son's betrayal glinting mockingly. "Mom!" Marcus hugged me, and I forced myself not to stiffen, not to pull away. Not yet. Something smells incredible. I just placed pot roast, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Come in. Sit down. Dinner's almost ready. Chelsea surveyed my small living room with barely concealed disdain, her gaze lingering on my worn furniture and outdated decor. I saw her exchange a glance with Marcus, a look that said more than words could about what she thought of my modest circumstances. If only she knew that her designer wardrobe, her luxury lifestyle, her destination wedding plans, all of it was being funded by the woman whose home she was silently mocking. We sat down to dinner, and I watched them eat food I'd prepared with my own hands while wearing clothes and jewelry purchased with money stolen from me. Chelsea dominated the conversation, as I'd expected she would, going on and on about their wedding plans. We've narrowed it down to 3 venues in Tuscany. This one is my favorite, a private villa in Chianti with the most stunning views. It's absolutely perfect for what we want. Intimate ceremony, maybe 50 guests, 3 days celebration with wine tastings and tours. It's going to be magical. That sounds expensive, I said quietly, taking a sip of water to steady myself. Oh, it is, Chelsea laughed, seemingly oblivious to any subtext. We're looking at probably $200,000 for the whole weekend when you factor in flying everyone out, accommodations, all the events. But Marcus keeps saying not to worry about the budget, that we should have the wedding of our dreams. He's been so incredible about everything. I looked at my son, really looked at him, searching for any sign of guilt, any crack in his facade. But he just smiled indulgently at Chelsea, reaching over to squeeze her hand. You only get married once, he said. It should be special. Twice, actually, Chelsea corrected with a laugh. But this one will be forever, I'm sure of it. Twice. Of course Chelsea had been married before. Why did that not surprise me? I continued serving dessert,
apple pie that I'd baked that afternoon, and made small talk while inside my rage built and built. Finally, after coffee had been served and Chelsea had shown me no fewer than 47 photos of potential wedding details, I knew it was time. "Marcus," I said, my voice cutting through Chelsea's monologue about floral arrangements, "I need to talk to you about something important." Something in my tone made him look up sharply. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of wariness in his eyes before he covered it with a smile. "Sure, Mom. What's up?" I stood and walked to the side table, picking up the manila folder I'd prepared. The weight of it in my hands felt significant, like I was holding the proof of my son's betrayal and my own impending heartbreak in physical form. "I got a call from the bank this week, from their fraud department. It seems there's been some unusual activity on my accounts."
The color drained from Marcus's face so quickly, I thought for a moment he might faint. Chelsea, oblivious, looked up from her phone with mild curiosity. "Fraud? Oh my God, Eleanor, that's terrible! Did someone steal your identity?" The irony of her question would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. Someone did steal my identity, yes. The thing is, I know exactly who did it. I opened the folder and began laying out the evidence. Bank statements with charges highlighted in yellow, screenshots from Chelsea's Instagram showing her flaunting the things purchased with my money, the timeline I'd created showing how every charge corresponded to a post, a trip, a luxury they couldn't actually afford. $87,342, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. That's how much has been stolen from me over the past 7 months. 12 different credit cards opened in my name without my knowledge or permission. Every single charge corresponding to your lifestyle, Marcus. Your clothes, your cars, your trips, your engagement ring. The silence that followed was deafening. Chelsea's face had gone from confused to horrified as she processed what I was saying, her eyes darting between the documents on the table and Marcus's ashen face. "Marcus?" Her voice was high and thin. "What is she talking about?" But Marcus couldn't speak. He was staring at the evidence spread across the table like it was a venomous snake that might strike at any moment. "Let me make this very clear," I continued, gathering strength from my anger. "Everything about your life for the past 7 months has been a lie. The successful business, the financial security, the ability to afford luxury without concern, all of it was built on money stolen from your own mother. While you were helping me recover from surgery, while I trusted you completely, you were systematically robbing me blind." "Mom, Marcus finally found his voice, but it came out as a croak. Don't you dare try to explain this away. I have documented everything, every charge, every lie, every post Chelsea made bragging about the life you were giving her, a life paid for by destroying my financial security." Chelsea was staring at her engagement ring now like it had suddenly become radioactive. "Marcus, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't—" I was gonna pay it back. The words exploded out of him, desperate and panicked. The business hit some rough patches, and I just needed to borrow some money temporarily. I was going to pay every penny back before you even knew. "Borrow?" I laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. "You don't borrow by committing identity theft, Marcus. You don't borrow by opening credit cards in someone else's name without their knowledge or permission. That's called fraud. That's called elder financial abuse. That's called destroying your own mother to fund your own lies." Chelsea stood up so abruptly her chair tipped backward, clattering against the floor. "You told me you were successful. You said your business was thriving. You let me plan a $200,000 wedding when—" She stopped, her face crumpling as the full scope of the deception hit her. "Oh my God, you're broke, aren't you? Everything was a lie."
Chelsea, please, just let me explain. Explain what? Her voice was shrill now, all polish and composure gone. Explain how you're a fraud? How you stole from your own mother? How every gift you gave me, every dinner, every trip, it was all stolen money? She yanked the engagement ring off her finger with such force I thought she might break her knuckle. For a moment, she just stared at it, this massive diamond that had represented a future that never actually existed. Then she threw it at Marcus, the ring bouncing off his chest and skittering across my kitchen floor. "We're done," she said, her voice cracking. "Whatever this was, whatever I thought we had, it's over. I'm not going to be associated with a thief who steals from his own mother." "Chelsea, wait!" Marcus scrambled to his feet, trying to grab her arm, but she jerked away from him like his touch burned. "Don't you dare touch me. Don't ever contact me again." She grabbed her purse from the counter and turned to me, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "Mrs. Castellano, I swear to God, I didn't know. I never would have if I'd known any of this." "I believe you," I said quietly, and I did. Chelsea might be shallow and materialistic, but she wasn't a criminal. She'd been a victim of Marcus's lies in her own way, just not the way I had been. The door slammed behind her with such force that one of my mother's decorative plates fell off its hook on the wall, shattering on the floor. The sound seemed to break whatever trance Marcus had been in. He sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. "Mom," he said, and his voice was thick with tears. "Mom, please. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just a few charges here and there, and then I couldn't stop. The business really was struggling, and I thought if I could just maintain the appearance of success long enough, I could turn it around. I was going to pay you back, I swear." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, whose diapers I'd changed, whose tears I'd dried, whose dreams I'd supported, even when money was impossibly tight. And I felt nothing but a cold, distant sadness. "When did it start, Marcus? The truth this time." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, 9 months ago, maybe 10. The business took a hit when the Riverside commercial development deal fell through. I'd overextended myself, made commitments I couldn't keep. I started using cash advances to cover payroll, then to cover the cash advance payments, and it just spiraled. "So you decided to steal from your mother instead of admitting you were struggling? Instead of asking for help?"
"I couldn't." He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Don't you see? I couldn't come to you and admit I'd failed. You'd sacrificed everything to put me through business school. You'd always been so proud of my success. How could I tell you it was all falling apart?" "So instead, you stole from me?" I said flatly. "You forged my signature, opened credit cards in my name, and systematically drained my retirement savings to maintain a lie. You let me believe you were successful while you were actually destroying my financial security. I was going to fix it. The Pinehurst project. If that comes through—" "There is no project," I interrupted. "There's no miraculous business deal that's going to make this right. You've stolen nearly $90,000 from me, Marcus. Even if you somehow started making money tomorrow, how long would it take you to pay that back? Years? Decades? Would you even try once the pressure was off?" He didn't answer, and his silence was answer enough. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 73 years in my bones. "I need you to leave now." "Mom, please, we can work this out. I'll sign a repayment plan. I'll do whatever you want. Just please don't go to the police." There it was, the real fear. Not that he'd hurt me, not that he'd betrayed my trust, but that he might actually face consequences for what he'd done. "First thing Monday morning," I said, my voice steady and cold, "I'm meeting with a lawyer. I'm filing a police report for fraud and elder financial abuse. I'm closing every single account you have access to, and I'm putting fraud alerts on my credit that will prevent you from ever using my information again. You'd send your own son to jail? His voice was disbelieving, like he genuinely couldn't fathom that I would actually hold him accountable. You stole nearly $90,000 from your elderly mother while she recovered from surgery. What did you think would happen when I found out? That I'd just forgive you? That I'd sacrifice what little financial security I have left to protect you from your own crimes? I'm your son, and I'm your mother. The words exploded out of me with all the rage and hurt and betrayal I'd been holding back. I'm your mother, and you looked me in the eye every day for months while you robbed me. You smiled and hugged me and told me you loved me while you were destroying my life. You helped me to the bathroom after surgery while you were charging thousands of dollars on credit cards you'd opened in my name. What kind of son does that? Marcus had no answer. He just sat there, tears running down his face, looking like a stranger wearing my son's features. Get out, I said again. Get out of my home and don't come back. My lawyer will be in contact regarding restitution. If you're smart, you'll hire a lawyer of your own. Because I'm not protecting you anymore, Marcus. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. He stood up on shaking legs, looking like he wanted to say something else, but I turned my back on him. I couldn't look at him anymore. Couldn't reconcile the man before me with the child I'd loved so fiercely. I heard him walk to the door, heard it open, then pause. Mom, I really am sorry, for whatever that's worth. I didn't turn around. It's worth nothing, because if you were truly sorry, you would have stopped. You would have confessed. You would have found any other way to solve your problems besides stealing from your own mother. Your sorry is just words, Marcus. It doesn't change what you did, and it doesn't fix what you've broken. The door closed softly behind him, and then I was alone in my apartment, with the shattered remains of the dinner I'd made, the evidence of my son's betrayal still spread across my kitchen table, and a future that looked very different than it had just 1 week ago. I walked to the window and watched Marcus get into his BMW, the one with the down payment I'd unknowingly provided. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time, his head on the steering wheel, before finally starting the engine and driving away. And as I stood there in my quiet apartment, looking at the engagement ring still lying on my kitchen floor where Chelsea had thrown it, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, exactly. Not happiness. But something close to peace. Because for the first time in 7 months, the theft had stopped. For the first time since Marcus had started his systematic fraud, I was no longer actively losing money. The accounts would be closed, the fraud alerts would be in place. My son would no longer have access to my financial information. The damage was done, yes. I would spend months, maybe years, fighting with credit card companies and trying to repair my credit score. I might never recover all the money he's stolen. I would definitely lose my son because whatever relationship we had before couldn't survive what he'd done. But I had one thing that I didn't have when I woke up that Tuesday morning and got the call from the bank. I had my dignity back. I was no longer a victim, not someone to be used and manipulated and discarded. I was a woman who had discovered a crime against her and was taking action to ensure it never happened again. I was 73 years old, and I was finally learning to put myself first. I bent down and picked up the engagement ring, this $42,000 symbol of my son's betrayal. The diamonds caught the light, beautiful and cold. I placed it in a Ziploc bag and put it in my purse. Tomorrow, I would give it to Rebecca at the bank. It was evidence, after all. And unlike my son's apologies, evidence actually meant something. Then I started cleaning up dinner, washing dishes, putting away leftovers that I knew I'd probably throw out because I'd never be able to eat pot roast again without remembering this night.
As I worked, I thought about the next steps. Monday, I'd meet with the lawyer. We'd go over everything, discuss my options, figure out the best path forward. Tuesday, I'd file the police report. By the end of the week, the accounts would be closed and the fraud alerts would be in place.
And after that? After the legal matters were settled and the dust had cleared? I didn't know. For the first time in my life, I genuinely didn't know what came next. But standing there in my kitchen at 73 years old, washing dishes and planning my son's legal prosecution, I realized something. Not knowing what came next didn't scare me anymore. Because whatever happened, whatever consequences Marcus faced, whatever financial struggles I still had ahead, I would face them with my head held high and my dignity intact. And that, I realized, was worth more than anything Marcus had stolen. I didn't sleep that Saturday night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus's face across my dinner table, pale and guilty, finally caught in his web of lies. I saw Chelsea's horror as she realized her entire relationship had been built on stolen money. I saw that $42,000 engagement ring skittering across my kitchen floor. But mostly, I kept replaying the moment when Marcus had asked, "You'd send your own son to jail?" Like I was the one who had done something wrong. Like holding him accountable for stealing nearly $90,000 from his elderly mother was somehow a betrayal of family bonds? The audacity of it kept me awake until dawn. Sunday morning arrived, gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with all the evidence I'd compiled spread out before me. Bank statements, credit card bills, screenshots from Chelsea's Instagram, the timeline I'd created showing how every fraudulent charge corresponded to some luxury Marcus and Chelsea had enjoyed. Looking at it all laid out like this, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, yes. Betrayal, absolutely. But also something I hadn't expected, embarrassment. How had I not seen this? How had I been so blind to what my own son was doing? I thought back over the past 7 months, searching for signs I'd missed. Had there been warning signals I'd ignored? Red flags I'd dismissed because I wanted to believe in my son's success? The truth was, there had been hints. Small things that hadn't seemed significant at the time, but now felt glaringly obvious. 3 months ago, when I'd mentioned that I was having trouble with my credit card being declined at the grocery store, Marcus had been oddly dismissive. "Probably just a glitch in the system, Mom. These things happen." He'd handed me $40 in cash and changed the subject. Now I understood why. He'd probably maxed out that card with his fraudulent charges, and the last thing he wanted was me calling the bank to investigate. 6 weeks ago, when I'd suggested we go through my financial statements together so I could understand them better, he'd suddenly become too busy. "Work's crazy right now, Mom. Maybe next month." Next month had never come because the moment I actually looked at those statements, his scheme would unravel. And just last month, when I'd casually mentioned that I'd seen a news story about elder financial abuse and how awful it was that people would steal from their own parents, Marcus had gotten strangely quiet. I thought he was just absorbed in his phone, but now I realized he'd probably been panicking, wondering if somehow I'd found out. All the signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The doorbell startled me out of my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a paranoid moment, I wondered if Marcus had come back to try to talk me out of pressing charges. But when I checked the people, I saw my neighbor from across the hall, Dorothy Chen, holding a covered dish. "Eleanor," Dorothy said when I opened the door, her kind face creased with concern. "I heard shouting last night. Are you all right? I brought you some soup." Dorothy was 81, a widow like me, and we'd become friends over the past year through shared meals and walks around the neighborhood. She was one of the few people I'd told about my hip replacement surgery, and she'd checked on me regularly during my recovery. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "And thank you for the soup. You didn't have to do that." "Nonsense! That's what neighbors are for." She set the soup in my kitchen, then noticed all the paper spread out across my table. "Oh my, that looks serious. Eleanor, is everything okay?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep this private, to not burden Dorothy with my problems. But another part of me desperately needed to talk to someone, to hear from someone I trusted that I wasn't overreacting, that what Marcus had done was as terrible as it seemed. "Can you sit for a minute? I could use some advice." Over the next hour, I told Dorothy everything. The phone call from the bank, the discovery of the fraudulent accounts, the evidence I'd compiled, the confrontation with Marcus and Chelsea. Dorothy listened without interrupting, her expression growing more horrified with each detail. "That boy," she said, finally shaking her head. "Eleanor, I am so sorry. No mother should have to go through something like this. I keep wondering if I'm overreacting. He's my son. Maybe I should give him a chance to pay it back without involving the police."
Dorothy's eyes flashed with anger. "Overreacting? Eleanor, he stole nearly $90,000 from you. He committed fraud. He exploited your trust while you were recovering from surgery. That's not a mistake. That's not a momentary lapse in judgment. That's calculated criminal behavior." "But he'll go to jail. My son will have a criminal record. It could ruin his life." "He ruined his own life when he decided to steal from his mother," Dorothy said firmly. "And more importantly, if you don't press charges, what happens? He promises to pay you back, you agree to keep quiet, and then what? He makes a few payments and stops? He disappears? He does the same thing to someone else?" She leaned forward, taking my hand in both of hers. "Eleanor, I worked as a social worker for 35 years before I retired. I've seen cases like this more times than I can count. Elder financial abuse, especially by family members, it almost never stops on its own. The perpetrator has to face real consequences, or they just keep doing it. If not to you, then to their next victim." Her words struck something deep inside me. I'd been so focused on my own hurt and betrayal that I hadn't thought about the bigger picture. If Marcus could do this to his own mother, what would he do to someone he cared about less? What would he do to his next girlfriend, his next business partner, his next victim? "You're right," I said quietly. "I know you're right. It's just hard." "Of course it's hard. You love him. That's what makes this so painful. But Eleanor, real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their actions. That's the only way they learn. That's the only way they have a chance at actually changing." After Dorothy left, I felt more certain about my decision. Tomorrow, I would meet with the lawyer. I would start the process of holding Marcus accountable, not just for what he'd done to me, but to prevent him from doing it to someone else. I spent the rest of Sunday organizing my evidence into a clear, chronological narrative. I wanted to make the lawyer's job as easy as possible. I wanted there to be no doubt, no ambiguity, no room for Marcus to claim this was all a misunderstanding. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. I dressed carefully in my best outfit, a navy blue pantsuit I'd bought for my husband's funeral 6 years ago. I wanted to look competent, credible, like someone who should be taken seriously. Patricia Brennan's office was in a renovated Victorian house downtown that had been converted into a suite of professional offices. The waiting room was comfortable and tastefully decorated, with plants and artwork that made it feel less intimidating than I'd expected. "Mrs. Castellano," a woman in her mid-50s appeared in the doorway, extending her hand. "I'm Patricia Brennan. Please come back to my office." Patricia's office was lined with law books and certificates, but it also had photos of what I assumed were her grandchildren and a needlepoint pillow on her chair that read, "Well-behaved women rarely make history." I liked her immediately. "So," Patricia said, settling into her chair and pulling out a legal pad, "Rebecca Martinez from Premier Savings gave me a brief overview of your situation, but I'd like to hear the whole story from you. Take your time and don't leave anything out." For the third time in as many days, I went through everything. But this time, it felt different. Patricia took detailed notes, asking specific questions about timelines, asking to see particular documents, occasionally making a notation that looked significant. When I finally finished, she sat back and exhaled slowly. "Mrs. Castellano, I'm not going to sugarcoat this.
What your son did constitutes multiple felonies: identity theft, fraud, elder financial abuse, forgery. We're looking at potentially serious prison time if a prosecutor decides to pursue this aggressively." My stomach clenched. Hearing it stated so bluntly made it feel more real, more frightening. "However," Patricia continued, "I want you to understand all your options before you make any decisions. Option 1, we file a police report and let the criminal justice system handle it. The advantage is that this takes the burden off you. The state prosecutes, not you personally. The disadvantage is that you lose control over the outcome. A prosecutor might offer a plea deal you don't like, or might decide not to prosecute at all if they think the case is too complicated or not worth their resources." She flipped to a new page on her legal pad. "Option 2, we pursue this through civil litigation. We sue Marcus for restitution, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. We can potentially recover your money faster this way, and you have more control over the process. The downside is that it's expensive, time-consuming, and there's no guarantee he actually has assets to recover. You could win a judgment and never see a penny. What would you recommend?" I asked. She considered for a moment. "Honestly, I'd recommend both. File the police report and pursue criminal charges. That creates the pressure and consequences that might actually motivate him to cooperate. Simultaneously, we file a civil suit. That protects your ability to recover damages regardless of what happens in the criminal case. And frankly, the existence of a criminal case strengthens your civil case significantly." "How much would that cost?" "For the civil case, I typically work on a contingency basis for elder abuse cases. That means I take a percentage of whatever we recover, usually a third. You pay court costs and filing fees, which might be a few $1,000s, but you don't pay my hourly rate unless we win. The criminal case costs you nothing directly since that's handled by the prosecutor's office."
I thought about my bank account, already depleted by Marcus's theft. A few $1,000s in court costs would hurt, but if it meant recovering even part of what he'd stolen, it would be worth it. "Let's do both," I said, "criminal and civil." Patricia smiled, the first time I'd seen her really smile since we'd started talking. "Good. That's the right choice, Mrs. Castellano. Now, I need you to understand what comes next. When we file the police report, they'll investigate. They'll interview you, probably multiple times. They'll interview Marcus. They may interview Chelsea Whitmore and anyone else who might have relevant information. This will take time, probably months. During that time, Marcus may try to contact you. He may apologize, make promises, try to convince you to drop the charges. You need to be prepared for that." "I won't drop them," I said firmly. "I believe you. But I've seen this play out many times. Family members put pressure on the victim. They say things like, 'How can you do this to your own son?' Or, 'Think about what this will do to the family.' You need to be ready for that kind of emotional manipulation." I thought about my small family. Marcus was my only child. His father was dead. My siblings lived across the country, and we'd never been close. Who would pressure me? Who else would even care? I don't have much family left. It's mostly just me. What about friends, people Marcus might reach out to, asking them to intervene on his behalf? I thought about my social circle. Dorothy's certainly wouldn't help Marcus. My friends from the community center didn't even know him. My church group knew of him but didn't have any real relationship with him. I don't think that's going to be an issue, I said. All right, then let's get started. I'm going to draft a civil complaint today. Tomorrow, I want you to go to the Riverside County Sheriff's Office and file a formal police report. Bring all this evidence with you. Ask to speak with someone from their economic crimes unit. They handle fraud cases. Be prepared to spend several hours there. They'll want a detailed statement. She pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. This is the name of the detective I usually work with on these cases. Ask for her specifically. Her name is Detective Sarah Okonkwo. She's excellent, very thorough, and she takes elder abuse cases seriously. I took the card, running my thumb over the embossed lettering. This was really happening. I was really going to report my own son to the police. Mrs. Castellano, Patricia said gently, are you sure you're ready for this? Once we start down this road, it's going to be difficult to stop. Your relationship with your son will likely be permanently damaged, if it isn't already. Other people will have opinions. Some will support you, some won't understand. This is going to be hard. I looked at the evidence folder in my lap, thought about the nearly $90,000 Marcus had stolen, remembered the casual cruelty in his voice when he'd said, "You'd send your own son to jail? Like I was the unreasonable one?" "I'm sure," I said. "He made his choices. Now he lives with the consequences." Tuesday morning, I drove to Riverside County Sheriff's Office with my folder of evidence and Patricia's business card clutched in my hand. The building was imposing, all concrete and glass, with police cruisers parked in neat rows outside. The lobby was busy, officers coming and going, civilians at the front desk reporting various issues. I stood in line, my heart pounding, feeling like everyone could somehow tell what I was there to do. Like they were all judging me for being the mother who was about to report her son to the police. "Can I help you?" The officer at the desk was young, probably not much older than Marcus, with kind eyes and a patient expression. "I need to file a report," I said, my voice coming out smaller than I had intended. "For fraud, elder financial abuse. I was told to ask for Detective Sarah Okonkwo from the Economic Crimes Unit." The officer's expression shifted to one of sympathy. "One moment, please." He made a phone call, spoke quietly into the receiver, then nodded. "Detective Okonkwo will be right down. You can have a seat over there." I sat in one of the hard plastic chairs lining the wall, the folder heavy in my lap. Around me, life went on. A woman arguing with her teenage son, a man reporting a stolen bicycle, a couple filling out paperwork for what looked like a traffic accident. Normal problems, normal crimes, not a mother reporting her son for stealing her life savings. "Mrs. Castellano." I looked up to see a tall woman in her 40s with close-cropped hair and an air of quiet competence. She was wearing slacks and a blazer, a badge clipped to her belt. "I'm Detective Okonkwo. Patricia Brennan called me this morning and gave me a heads up that you might be coming in. Why don't we go somewhere more private where we can talk?" She led me through a maze of hallways to a small interview room. It wasn't like what you see on TV shows, no two-way mirror or harsh fluorescent lighting, just a table, some chairs, and a recording device on the wall. "Can I get you some water? Coffee?" "Water would be nice, thank you." She returned a moment later with a bottle of water and sat down across from me, pulling out a notebook. "All right, Mrs. Castellano. I understand you're here to report a fraud case involving a family member. Before we start, I want you to know that this conversation is being recorded for documentation purposes. Is that all right with you?" "Yes, that's fine." "Good. Now I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. Take your time." For the 4th time, I went through the story. But this time felt different. This time, I was making it official. This time, there was no going back. Detective Okonkwo listened intently, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I got to the part about Marcus having authorized access to my accounts after my surgery, she paused.
So he was legitimately authorized to use your accounts initially?
Yes, I had hip replacement surgery, and I needed help managing bills and expenses while I recovered. We went to the bank together and added him as an authorized user. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I was back on my feet. But he never removed himself as an authorized user after you recovered? No. And I didn't think to ask him to. I trusted him. Detective Okonkwo nodded, making another note. That's actually helpful from a legal standpoint. It shows that the authorization was given for a specific purpose and time frame, and that he abused that authorization beyond its intended scope. What about these new accounts that were opened? The credit cards you didn't know about? I never authorized those. I never even knew they existed until the bank called me. But he would have needed your personal information to open them. Social security number, date of birth, that sort of thing. He had access to all of that while he was staying with me after my surgery. I kept all my important documents in a filing cabinet in my bedroom. He could have easily photocopied everything. We spent the next 2 hours going through every detail. Detective Okonkwo examined each bank statement, each credit card bill, each screenshot from Chelsea's Instagram. She took photos of everything with a special camera, creating a digital evidence file. "This is very thorough," she said, sorting through the timeline I'd created. "You've done a lot of the investigative work for us. That's going to make this case much easier to prosecute. So you'll be able to do something to charge him? I'll need to verify some of this information independently, interview witnesses, get official statements from the banks. But yes, based on what you've shown me, I believe we have sufficient evidence to pursue multiple felony charges: identity theft, forgery, fraud, and elder financial abuse, which in this state carries enhanced penalties. What happens now?" "I'll compile the investigation file and present it to the district attorney's office. They'll make the final decision about what charges to file and whether to prosecute. That process typically takes a few weeks. In the meantime, I'll need to interview your son. Do you know his current address?" I gave her Marcus's address, feeling like a traitor even as I did it, but Dorothy's words echoed in my mind. Real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their actions. "Mrs. Castellano, I need to warn you about something. Once your son learns that you've filed this report, he may try to contact you. He may apologize, make promises to pay the money back, try to convince you to drop the charges. You need to understand that you can't actually drop criminal charges once they're filed. That decision belongs to the prosecutor's office, not to you. But your cooperation is important to the case, and if you suddenly become uncooperative, it makes prosecution much more difficult." "I understand. I won't talk to him." "You don't have to refuse all contact if you don't want to, but I'd recommend that any communication be in writing, through text or email, so there's a record. Don't meet with him in person. Don't take phone calls where it's your word against his about what was said. Document everything." She handed me her business card. "If he contacts you, if he threatens you, if anything happens that makes you uncomfortable, call me immediately. And if he offers to pay the money back in exchange for you dropping the investigation, that needs to be reported too. That could potentially be witness tampering." I left the sheriff's office 3 hours after I'd arrived, feeling emotionally exhausted, but also oddly relieved. It was done. The report was filed. The investigation had begun. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. My phone buzzed as I got into my car. A text message from an unknown number. "Mom, it's Marcus. I got a new phone. Please call me. We need to talk. I can fix this." My hands trembled as I read the message. He already knew. But how? I just filed the report a few hours ago. There was no way Detective Okonkwo had contacted him already. Unless someone at the bank had tipped him off. Or maybe he'd been monitoring my credit report and saw the fraud alerts I'd placed. I remembered Detective Okonkwo's advice: document everything, don't take phone calls. I took a screenshot of the message and texted it to both Patricia and Detective Okonkwo, then blocked the number. Almost immediately, another text came through, different number. "Mom, please, I know you're angry, but we can work this out. Don't do this to our family. I'm begging you." Screenshot, forward, block. A third message from yet another number. "I'll pay you back every penny. I've already talked to my accountant. We can set up a payment plan. You don't have to destroy my life over this." Destroy my life? The audacity of it took my breath away. He had stolen nearly $90,000 from me, and somehow I was the one destroying his life by holding him accountable? Screenshot, forward, block.
The messages kept coming from different numbers, each one more desperate than the last. Some were apologetic, some were angry. One accused me of never believing in him, of always expecting him to fail. Another claimed that Chelsea was threatening to press charges too, that I was ruining multiple lives over money. After the 8th message, I turned off my phone. I couldn't handle it anymore. When I got home, Dorothy was waiting in the hallway outside my apartment. One look at my face, and she knew something was wrong. "Come on," she said, linking her arm through mine. "You're having dinner with me tonight, and you're going to tell me everything."
Over Dorothy's homemade chicken soup, I showed her the messages Marcus had been sending. She read them with increasing fury, her lips pressed into a thin line. "That boy has nerve," she said finally, "trying to make you feel guilty for his crimes. Eleanor, you need to change your phone number. This is harassment." "But what if the detective needs to reach me or Patricia?" "Give them your new number. You don't owe Marcus access to you. He forfeited that privilege when he decided to steal from you." She was right, of course. The next morning, I went to my phone carrier and got a new number. I gave it to Detective Okonkwo, Patricia, Rebecca at the bank, and Dorothy. That was it. 4 people had my new contact information. Marcus wasn't one of them. The peace that followed was both a relief and unsettling. For days, I waited for something to happen, for the other shoe to drop, but there was just silence. Until Thursday afternoon, when there was a knock on my door. I checked the peephole, and my heart sank. It was Marcus, standing in my hallway, looking haggard and desperate. "Mom, I know you're home," he called through the door. "Your car is in the parking lot. Please, just give me 5 minutes. Just let me explain." I stood frozen, my hand on the deadbolt, torn between the mother who wanted to comfort her clearly suffering child and the victim who knew better than to give him another chance to manipulate me. "Mom, please, I've lost everything. Chelsea left me. She's telling everyone what I did. My business is falling apart. The bank froze my accounts. I have nothing left. And now you've reported me to the police? Mom, they're talking about felony charges, prison time. You're going to send me to prison." Every word was designed to make me feel guilty, to make me responsible for his suffering. And God help me, it was working. Part of me wanted to open that door, to tell him it would be okay, to find some way to fix this. But I remembered Dorothy's words. I remembered Detective Okonkwo's warning, and I remembered the evidence folder sitting on my kitchen table, proof of 7 months of systematic theft and betrayal. "Marcus," I said through the door, keeping my voice steady, "I can't talk to you. My lawyer has advised me not to have any contact with you while the investigation is ongoing. You need to leave." "Are you kidding me? I'm your son. You're really going to hide behind a lawyer?" "I'm going to protect myself from someone who stole nearly $90,000 from me. Now please leave or I'll call the police." "You've already called the police. You've already ruined my life. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to leave my property. Now." There was a long silence. Then, "Fine. But Mom, when this all comes crashing down, when you realize what you've done to your only son, don't expect me to forgive you. Some things you can't come back from." His footsteps retreated down the hall. I waited until I heard the stairwell door close before I moved, my legs shaking so badly I had to sit down. He was trying to make me the villain, trying to reframe his theft as my betrayal, trying to make me believe that holding him accountable was worse than what he'd done to me. But I wouldn't let him rewrite history. I wouldn't let him twist this into something it wasn't. I called Detective Okonkwo and reported the visit. She sounded concerned. "Mrs. Castellano, he's not supposed to contact you at all. I'm going to have a talk with him and his attorney, if he has one yet. But in the meantime, if he shows up at your home again, call 911 immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." "Do you think he'd hurt me?" There was a pause. "I don't think he's violent, but he's desperate.
and desperate people do unpredictable things. Better to be safe. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt the weight of what I'd set in motion. Marcus was right about one thing. Some things you can't come back from. Our relationship, whatever it had been, was over. Maybe it had been over the moment he'd forged my signature on that first credit card application. Maybe it had been over long before that, and I just hadn't wanted to see it. But one thing was certain. There was no going back. Only forward, into whatever came next. And as frightening as that uncertainty was, it was still better than the alternative. Better than being a victim. Better than enabling his crimes. Better than teaching him that he could betray the people who loved him without facing any real consequences. I had made my choice. Now Marcus would have to live with his. 3 weeks after filing the police report, I received a call from Detective Okonkwo that changed everything. Mrs. Castellano, we need to meet. Something's come up in the investigation that you need to know about. Can you come to my office this afternoon? The tone in her voice made my stomach clench. Something was wrong, or maybe something was right. I couldn't tell, but either way, it sounded significant. I arrived at the sheriff's office at 2 o'clock, and Detective Okonkwo met me in the lobby, her expression unreadable. She led me back to the same interview room where I'd given my initial statement 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Castellano, I want to start by telling you that your case has gotten more complicated, but in a way that actually strengthens our prosecution. We've discovered that you weren't the only victim. My hand flew to my mouth. What? 2 days ago, I received a call from a woman named Chelsea Whitmore. She came in yesterday and filed her own report against Marcus for fraud and theft. Chelsea, Marcus's ex-fiancée, the woman who had thrown her engagement ring at him in my kitchen.
What did he do to her? I asked, though part of me already knew. Detective Okonkwo opened a file folder on the table between us. According to Miss Whitmore's statement, Marcus told her he was a successful real estate developer with multiple properties and investments. Based on those representations, she invested $65,000 into what he claimed was a joint business venture. She gave him the money in 3 installments over 4 months, believing it was going toward property acquisitions and development costs. But there was no business venture, I said quietly. Correct. There were no properties, no investments, no development projects. Marcus used her money to fund his personal expenses and to make minimum payments on the credit cards he'd opened fraudulently in your name. Essentially, he was running a Ponzi scheme on a small scale, using new money to cover old debts while maintaining the appearance of success. I felt sick. It wasn't enough that he'd stolen from his own mother. He'd also defrauded the woman he claimed to love, the woman he'd proposed to with a ring purchased with my stolen money. There's more, Detective Okonkwo continued. Once Miss Whitmore started digging into Marcus's background after your confrontation, she discovered that she wasn't his first victim either. She contacted his previous girlfriend, a woman named Stephanie Ruiz. Miss Ruiz had a similar experience. Marcus convinced her to invest $40,000 in a fake business opportunity 3 years ago. She never saw that money again, and when she threatened to sue, Marcus convinced her it would be too expensive and complicated to pursue legal action. She eventually gave up. 3 victims. At least 3 victims that they knew about. How many others were there? How many people had Marcus charmed and manipulated and stolen from over the years? Miss Whitmore has been very cooperative with our investigation, Detective Okonkwo said. She's provided financial records, text messages, emails, everything that documents Marcus's fraud. She's also agreed to testify if this goes to trial. With her testimony combined with yours and the financial evidence, we have an extremely strong case. Is Stephanie Ruiz pressing charges too? She's considering it. The statute of limitations hasn't expired on her case, but it's close. I've encouraged her to at least file a report so it's on record, even if the DA decides not to prosecute that particular case. It establishes a pattern of behavior which is useful in cases like this. Detective Okonkwo pulled out another document. Mrs. Castellano, I also want to update you on the criminal investigation. The DA's office has reviewed the evidence and they've decided to file formal charges against Marcus. He's being charged with 9 counts of identity theft, 12 counts of fraud, 3 counts of forgery, and 2 counts of elder financial abuse. If convicted on all counts, he's looking at potentially 15 to 20 years in prison. 15 to 20 years. My son could spend the next 2 decades in prison because of what he'd done. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt satisfied that justice was finally being served. Instead, I just felt hollow and sad. When will he be arrested? I asked. The warrant was issued this morning. Officers are probably picking him up right now. He'll be arraigned tomorrow morning. The DA is recommending bail be set at $250,000 given the flight risk and the severity of the charges. $250,000? Marcus didn't have that kind of money. His accounts were frozen, his assets seized as part of the investigation. He'd be sitting in jail until trial unless someone posted bail for him. And there was no one. I certainly wasn't going to do it. Chelsea wanted nothing to do with him. He'd burned every bridge, betrayed everyone who'd ever cared about him. Mrs. Castellano, are you all right? Detective Okonkwo asked gently. I don't know, I admitted. This is what I wanted, accountability, justice, consequences for what he did. But now that it's actually happening, I just feel tired and sad. That's completely normal. You can be angry at someone for what they did and still grieve for the relationship you thought you had. Those feelings aren't mutually exclusive. After leaving the sheriff's office, I sat in my car for a long time, trying to process everything I'd learned. Marcus had victimized at least 3 people that they knew about, possibly more. He was facing decades in prison, and somehow, some way, he'd convinced himself that he was the victim in all of this. My phone rang. It was Patricia Brennan, my lawyer. Eleanor, I just got off the phone with the DA's office. They've filed criminal charges against Marcus. This is good news for our civil case. A criminal conviction will make it much easier to recover damages. Detective Okonkwo told me. She also told me about Chelsea Whitmore. Yes, I spoke with Chelsea's attorney this morning. We're coordinating our civil suits to avoid duplication of effort. Between your claim and hers, we're looking at recovering approximately $150,000 plus damages. The challenge will be finding assets to collect against, but we're working on that. Patricia, I need to ask you something. If Marcus goes to prison, what are the chances I'll actually get my money back?
There was a pause. I'm going to be honest with you, Eleanor. The chances aren't great. He'll likely have to pay restitution as part of any criminal sentence, but prison wages are minimal, usually less than $1 an hour. It could take decades for him to pay back what he owes. The civil judgment gives us more options. We can put liens on any future assets, garnish wages if he ever gets a real job after prison, but recovery will be slow. So even if justice is served, I'm probably never going to see most of that money again. Probably not. I'm sorry, that's the harsh reality of these cases. The money is usually gone, spent on a lifestyle that can't be undone. But the judgment is still important. It establishes the debt, prevents him from discharging it in bankruptcy, and follows him for the rest of his life. He'll never be able to pretend it didn't happen. After I hung up, I drove home feeling the weight of it all. I'd done the right thing by reporting Marcus, by holding him accountable. But the right thing didn't necessarily make me whole. It didn't give me back my savings, my security, or my relationship with my son. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings. Marcus was arraigned, and bail was set at the amount the DA had recommended. He couldn't pay it, so he remained in custody. His public defender tried to arrange a plea deal, but the DA wasn't interested in negotiating given the severity of the crimes and the multiple victims involved. A trial date was set for 4 months out. In the meantime, Patricia was moving forward with the civil case, and Chelsea's attorney was doing the same. I tried to go back to my normal routine. Water aerobics on Tuesdays and Thursdays, volunteering at the community center on Wednesdays, book club on Friday evenings. But everything felt different now. People at the community center had heard about what happened, and I could see the pity in their eyes.
Some people avoided me entirely, probably not knowing what to say. Others were overly solicitous, treating me like I might break at any moment. The only person who treated me normally was Dorothy. She still came over for tea, still shared meals with me, still made me laugh with stories about her grandchildren and complaints about our landlord's failure to fix the broken elevator. "You know what I think?" Dorothy said one evening over dinner. "I think you should stop hiding." "I'm not hiding," I protested. "You are. You're going through the motions of your life, but you're not really living. You're waiting for this to be over, for the trial to happen, for some kind of closure. But Eleanor, that could be months away, maybe longer if there are appeals. You can't put your life on hold indefinitely." "What am I supposed to do? Act like everything is fine? Pretend I just sent my son to jail?" "No. But you could acknowledge that you survived something terrible and you're still here. You could recognize that you're stronger than you thought you were. You could start thinking about what you want your life to look like now, instead of just mourning what you lost." Her words stayed with me. What did I want my life to look like? For so long, my identity had been tied up in being Marcus's mother, in supporting him, in being proud of his supposed success. Who was I now that all of that was gone? I started small. I planted those tomatoes I'd been planning to plant the day everything fell apart. I joined a new book club that met at the library where no one knew me or my story. I took a pottery class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. And slowly, very slowly, I started to feel like myself again. Not the person I'd been before Marcus's betrayal. That Eleanor was gone forever. But someone new, someone who'd survived something terrible and come out the other side. 2 months after Marcus's arrest, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my kitchen making dinner when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Chelsea Whitmore standing in my hallway, looking nervous. I hesitated. We hadn't spoken since that awful dinner when everything had come to light. But curiosity won out. I opened the door. "Miss Whitmore, this is a surprise." "Mrs. Castellano, I'm sorry to show up unannounced. I tried calling, but I realized I don't have your new number. I got your address from the court records. I hope that's not too creepy." Despite everything, I almost smiled. "It's fine. Would you like to come in?" Chelsea followed me into my small living room, perching nervously on the edge of my sofa. She looked different than she had at that dinner. Less polished, more real. Her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and a simple sweater. Her makeup was minimal. She looked younger, more vulnerable.
After that night at your house, I went through everything. Every gift he'd given me, every trip we'd taken, every expense he'd covered. I cross-referenced it all with the dates you'd shown me from your credit card statements. Mrs. Costello, no, 90% of our relationship was funded with your money. The jewelry, the dinners, the weekend getaways, even my engagement ring. He didn't just steal from you financially. He stole moments that should have been ours and dealt them on your pain. Chelsea, you were a victim too. You invested $65,000 based on his lies. I did, and I'm angry about that. But my anger is different from yours. You're his mother. He should have protected you, not exploited you. What he did to you is so much worse than what he did to me. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Chelsea said, "I want you to know that I'm going to testify at the trial. The DA has me on their witness list. I'm going to tell the truth about everything, about how he manipulated me, about the fake business venture, about the lifestyle he was living. I know it means he'll probably go to prison for a very long time, but people need to know who he really is." "Thank you," I said. "I know that can't be easy." "It's not. Part of me still has feelings for him, or at least for who I thought he was. But I keep reminding myself that person never really existed.
The man I fell in love with was a character Marcus created, a role he played. The real Marcus is the one who stole from his mother and lied to everyone who cared about him. After Chelsea left, I thought about what she'd said. The Marcus I'd loved, the son I'd raised and supported and been proud of, had he ever really existed? Or had there always been this other person underneath, someone capable of such calculated cruelty? I didn't know. Maybe I'd never know. The trial began on a cold day in November, 4 months after I'd first filed the police report. The courthouse was intimidating, all marble and dark wood with people in suits hurrying purposefully through the halls. Patricia met me in the lobby. "Are you ready for this?" "No, but I don't think I'll ever be ready, so we might as well proceed." The courtroom was smaller than I had expected from TV shows. Marcus sat at the defense table with his public defender, wearing a suit I didn't recognize. He looked thinner, older, defeated. When I walked in, he turned and our eyes met for just a moment. I saw regret there, or maybe just self-pity. I looked away. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented the evidence methodically: bank statements, credit card bills, forged applications, everything documented with precision. Rebecca Martinez from the bank testified about the fraudulent accounts. Detective Okonkwo testified about the investigation and Marcus's pattern of behavior across multiple victims. Then it was my turn to testify. Walking to the witness stand felt like moving through water, everything slow and surreal. I was sworn in, and the prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 30s named Amanda Torres, began asking questions. "Mrs. Castellano, can you describe your relationship with the defendant prior to discovering his fraud?" "He was my son, my only child. I loved him and trusted him completely." "And when did you first give him access to your financial accounts?" "After my hip replacement surgery, about 8 months ago. He was helping me during my recovery, managing my bills and expenses while I focused on physical therapy." "And did you authorize him to open new credit card accounts in your name?" "No, never." "Did you authorize him to make personal purchases using your financial information?" "No." The questions continued, walking through every detail of the fraud, every betrayal, every lie. And through it all, I had to look at Marcus sitting there at the defense table and reconcile the man I'd raised with the criminal who'd done these things. When Amanda Torres asked, "How did it make you feel to discover that your son had stolen nearly $90,000 from you?" I almost couldn't answer. Betrayed, heartbroken, like everything I believed about my son was a lie. The defense attorney tried to paint Marcus as someone who'd made mistakes but didn't deserve to go to prison. He emphasized Marcus's lack of criminal history, his struggles with his business, the pressure he'd felt to maintain appearances. But it was a weak defense against the mountain of evidence the prosecution had presented. Chelsea testified on the second day. She was poised and articulate, walking the jury through Marcus's manipulation, the fake business venture, the $65,000 she had lost. She cried when describing the moment she'd realized that her entire relationship had been built on lies. Stephanie Ruiz testified too, describing how Marcus had defrauded her 3 years earlier, establishing that this wasn't an isolated incident, but a pattern of behavior spanning years. On the third day, Marcus himself testified. Against his attorney's advice, he insisted on taking the stand. I watched as he tried to explain his actions, to somehow make the jury understand why he had done what he had done. "I was desperate," he said, his voice breaking. "The business was failing and I didn't know what else to do. I never meant to hurt anyone. I was going to pay it all back." But under cross-examination from Amanda Torres, his story fell apart. She confronted him with evidence of luxury purchases, of trips and expensive dinners, of an engagement ring that cost more than most people made in a year. "This doesn't look like desperation, Mr. Castellano," she said, holding up receipts for a weekend in Las Vegas. "This looks like someone living far beyond their means and funding that lifestyle through systematic fraud and theft from vulnerable people, including your own elderly mother." Marcus had no good answer for that.
The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood and read the verdict. On the count of identity theft in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. It went on like that, guilty verdict after guilty verdict, until all 26 counts had been read. Marcus's face was white as paper. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder, but Marcus barely seemed to notice. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Patricia explained that with the guilty verdicts on all counts, Marcus was likely facing the maximum sentence, somewhere between 12 and 18 years in prison. "How do you feel?" she asked as we left the courthouse. "I don't know," I admitted. Not happy, not satisfied, just tired. 2 weeks later, I returned to the courthouse for sentencing. Judge Margaret Winters presided, a stern woman in her 60s with no patience for nonsense. Before pronouncing sentence, she allowed victim impact statements. I had prepared one, working on it for days with Patricia's help, but standing there at the podium, looking at Marcus in his orange jumpsuit, the prepared speech felt wrong. "Your Honor," I said, setting aside my notes, "Marcus is my son. I raised him alone after his father died. I worked 2 jobs to put him through college. I was so proud of him, of what I thought he'd become. And then I discovered that he'd stolen nearly $90,000 from me while I recovered from surgery. He didn't just take my money. He took my trust, my security, my peace of mind. He took the relationship we had and destroyed it completely. I'll probably never fully recover financially from what he did, but more than that, I've lost my son, not to prison, but to his own choices. The son I thought I had never really existed. I don't know what the appropriate punishment is for that. I just know that I need him to face real consequences. Not just for my sake, but for all the people he might hurt in the future if he doesn't." Chelsea gave her statement next, describing the emotional and financial devastation Marcus had caused. Stephanie Ruiz spoke about the years she'd spent trying to rebuild after Marcus's fraud. Then Judge Winters spoke. "Mr. Castellano, I've been on the bench for 23 years, and I've seen many cases of fraud and theft. But what makes your case particularly egregious is the systematic nature of your crimes and your willingness to victimize the people closest to you. You didn't steal from strangers. You stole from your mother, from women who loved you, from people who trusted you completely. You exploited that trust for personal gain, and you showed no remorse until you were caught. Even your testimony at trial was self-serving, focused on excusing your behavior rather than taking responsibility for it." She looked down at her notes, then back at Marcus. "The court finds that a substantial prison sentence is warranted. On all counts combined, I sentence you to 16 years in state prison with credit for time served. You will also be required to pay full restitution to your victims, totaling $152,000 plus interest. This restitution will be a condition of any future parole." 16 years. Marcus would be nearly 50 years old when he was released. The prime years of his life would be spent in prison, paying for what he'd done. As the bailiff led Marcus away, he looked back at me one last time. I saw tears on his face, saw the reality of his situation finally sinking in. But I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, no second thoughts about what I'd done. He'd made his choices. Now he would live with the consequences. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. The case had attracted local media attention, a cautionary tale about elder financial abuse and family betrayal. Patricia handled most of their questions, but one reporter managed to corner me. "Mrs. Castellano, how do you feel knowing your testimony helped send your son to prison for 16 years? I looked directly into the camera. "I feel like I did the right thing.
Family doesn't mean accepting abuse. Love doesn't mean enabling criminal behavior. My son stole from me from multiple people, and he needed to face consequences for that. I hope other families in similar situations know that it's okay to hold your loved ones accountable, even when it's painful, especially when it's painful. The next few months were about rebuilding. Patricia successfully secured a civil judgment against Marcus, though we both knew actually collecting that money would be a years-long process. Chelsea received a similar judgment. Between us, we were able to recover about $30,000 from Marcus's seized assets, a fraction of what he'd stolen, but something at least. I worked with a financial advisor to rebuild my credit and plan for my future. It would take time, but I would be okay. I'd learned to live on less during my years as a single mother. I could do it again. More importantly, I was learning to live with myself, with the choices I'd made, with the way my life had turned out. Some people in my community judged me for turning in my own son. I heard the whispers at the grocery store, saw the looks at church. But others understood. Others supported me. And Dorothy was always there, reminding me that I'd done nothing wrong, that I'd simply held someone accountable for their crimes. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he wrote. "I don't deserve forgiveness. I just want you to know that I finally understand what I did. Being in here, having time to think without distractions or excuses, I see it clearly now. I was selfish and cruel. I exploited people who loved me. I told myself I was just borrowing, that I'd pay it back, that the ends justified the means. But those were all lies I told myself to avoid facing the truth. I was a thief and a coward who hurt innocent people for personal gain. I'm not asking for a relationship or even a response to this letter. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry, and that I understand if you never want to hear from me again." I read the letter 3 times, trying to decide how I felt about it. Was this genuine remorse? Or just another manipulation, an attempt to eventually work his way back into my life? I didn't know. Maybe I'd never know for certain. In the end, I wrote a brief response, also sent through Patricia. "Marcus, I appreciate your apology. I hope that during your time in prison, you use the opportunity to genuinely change and become someone who can contribute positively to society when you're released. I'm not ready for a relationship with you, and I may never be, but I wish you well in your journey toward becoming a better person. That journey has to be for yourself, not for me or anyone else. Eleanor." After I mailed the letter, Dorothy asked if I thought I'd ever have a relationship with Marcus again. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe someday, after he's served his time and shown real change. Or maybe not. Either way, I'm at peace with it. I did what I needed to do to protect myself and hold him accountable. The rest is up to him." A year after Marcus's sentencing, I was doing better than I had expected. My finances were slowly recovering. I'd made new friends through my pottery class and book club. I'd even started dating. Though nothing serious, just coffee and conversation with a nice widower I'd met at the community center. Life wasn't perfect. I still had moments of sadness when I thought about Marcus, about the relationship we'd had and the one we'd never have again. I still sometimes wondered if I could have handled things differently. But mostly, I felt free. Free from the burden of maintaining a relationship with someone who'd exploited me. Free from the fear that had haunted me after discovering his crimes. Free to build a life that was truly my own, not defined by being someone's mother or someone's victim. One afternoon, as I worked in the community garden, tending my now thriving tomato plants, Dorothy came to help me weed. "You know," she said, "when I first met you, you seemed so diminished, like you were taking up as little space as possible in the world. But look at you now. You're thriving." "I'm surviving," I corrected. "No," Dorothy said firmly. "You're thriving. There's a difference. Surviving is just getting through each day. Thriving is building something meaningful from the pieces, and that's what you've done." As I drove home that evening, I thought about her words.
She was right. I had built something from the pieces of my shattered life. Not the life I'd planned or expected, but a good life nonetheless. I was 73 years old. My son was in prison. My savings were depleted. My family was fractured beyond repair. But I was still here. I was still standing. I had closed those 12 credit lines and stopped the bleeding. I had discovered the truth and demanded justice. I had protected not just myself, but future victims. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Epilogue, 2 years later. The community center was hosting a workshop on elder financial abuse prevention, and they'd asked me to be one of the speakers. I'd been nervous about saying yes, about standing up in front of a room of strangers and telling my story, but Patricia had encouraged me. People need to hear this, she said. They need to know they're not alone and that holding family members accountable is okay. So, there I was, standing at a podium in front of 40 people, mostly seniors like myself, telling them about Marcus, about the fraud, about the investigation and trial. The hardest part wasn't discovering what he'd done. It was making the decision to report it. Because you love your children, you want to protect them even when they've hurt you. But sometimes real love means letting them face consequences. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable harmful behavior. After my presentation, several people came up to talk to me. Some shared their own stories of being victimized by family members. Others thanked me for having the courage to speak out. One woman, probably in her early 60s, took my hand with tears in her eyes. "My daughter has been stealing from me," she whispered. "I've known for months, but I couldn't bring myself to do anything about it. Hearing your story, I think I'm ready now, ready to protect myself." I gave her Patricia's card and Detective Okonkwo's contact information. "It's hard," I told her. "It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. But you deserve to be safe. You deserve to have your financial security protected. And your daughter deserves to face consequences before she hurts someone else." As I drove home that evening, I thought about the journey I had been on over the past 2 years. From the devastating phone call from the bank to standing on a stage helping other people avoid similar betrayals. I'd lost my son, my savings, and my naivety about human nature. But I'd gained something too. Self-respect, resilience, and a sense of purpose I'd never had before. My phone buzzed with a text from Chelsea. We'd stayed in touch over the past 2 years, forming an unlikely friendship born of shared trauma. "Saw your presentation was today. How did it go?"
Better than expected, I typed back. Scary, but good. Proud of you, Eleanor. You've come a long way. She was right. I had come a long way from that broken woman sitting in a bank conference room, discovering the scope of her son's betrayal. I was 75 years old now. My retirement savings would never fully recover. I'd never have the comfortable cushion I'd planned for my later years. Marcus still had 14 years left on his sentence, and I still didn't know if we'd ever have a relationship again. But I had something more valuable than money or family harmony. I had my dignity. I had my self-respect. I had the knowledge that when faced with an impossible choice, I'd done the right thing, even when it cost me everything. And as I pulled into my parking spot at the apartment complex, saw Dorothy waving from her window, thought about the pottery class I was teaching next week and the book club meeting on Friday, I realized something. My life was good, different than I'd planned, smaller in some ways, but rich with meaning and connection and purpose. I'd closed those 12 credit lines. I'd stopped Marcus's fraud. I'd held him accountable. And in doing so, I'd discovered the truth about myself. I was stronger than I ever imagined. I was capable of surviving betrayal and emerging on the other side, not just intact, but transformed. At 75, I was finally truly free. And that was worth everything I'd lost along the way. To everyone watching this story, I want you to know if you're experiencing financial abuse from a family member, you're not alone. It's more common than people realize, and it's not your fault. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to hold people accountable,
even family members. Especially family members, because they should be the ones protecting you, not exploiting you. It won't be easy. It will probably be one of the hardest things you ever do. But your security, your dignity, and your peace of mind are worth fighting for. Don't let anyone tell you that family loyalty means accepting abuse. Don't let anyone convince you that reporting a crime makes you the bad person. You deserve better. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the person hurting you is to demand accountability. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. Please share it with anyone who might need to hear it, and comment below with your thoughts. Have you experienced something similar? What would you do in my situation? Remember, you are stronger than you know, and you deserve to be treated with respect and dignity no matter who is asking you to accept less. Take care of yourselves, and don't forget to close those credit lines.